Hi there, this is Jim from Weird Nashville, and today we are continuing our series on the actual studio models that were created for the original Star Trek television series. Of all the props used in the original TV series, the Galileo Shuttlecraft has the most fascinating Cinderella story. Passed from one owner to another over the past 50 years, it has been restored several times, and it has been left out to rot in the wind, rain, heat, and cold over and over again. But thanks to the passionate dedication of less than a handful of people, somehow, through all of this drama and neglect, the model is still with us today. Like a cat with 9 lives, the Galileo simply refuses to die. So join us after the break as we take a look at what is perhaps the most enigmatic studio model to ever come out of a television series. Put your feet up and get comfy because we are going back to the very, very beginning of Star Trek history. In the first season of the original TV show, the model kit company AMT had expressed an interest in purchasing the licensing rights to make model kits based off of Star Trek. It was during one of the subsequent conversations that some folks came up with the idea that perhaps Desilu and AMT could come to some kind of arrangement. So let's let Gene Winfield, the man who actually built the Galileo, explain it.
I went to the studio with a representative from AMT, and we negotiated the deal to build the Galileo and give it to the studio completely free so that AMT could build the Enterprise into the model kit form.
It is at this point in time that we encounter the first of many inconsistencies in Star Trek fandom over what actually happened. When this occurs, you generally get two sides battling it out over which side is considered the truth. Now, to be perfectly honest, this is normally caused by the fact that, let's face it, 50 years have gone by, and not everyone who actually saw what happened behind the scenes is still with us today. Now, more often than not, it is believed that AMT got the rights to make the Enterprise model for doing this, as we just heard from Gene's own comment and from this screenshot from Wikipedia. Isn't it funny, like that, 15, 20 years ago, we were told, don't believe everything you read on the internet. And now when we want to get something factual, we go to Wikipedia. According to documents found in the Roddenberry papers maintained at UCLA, the licensing company that handled licensing for Desilu actually did 2 separate contracts, one for the Enterprise and one for the Shuttlecraft. They weren't related in either way. Now, I've highlighted the first section in green because it clearly shows the Enterprise model was a separate contract and not contingent on the Shuttlecraft. They got the rights to produce the Enterprise model by paying a $3,000 advance against royalties that Desilu would be owed. The second section in yellow is what we're most interested in because it shows that in exchange for AMT building the shuttle sets at a budgeted cost of $24,000, they would be allowed to retain 50% of the royalty profits that were owed to Desilu on the Shuttlecraft model sales until they had repaid $12,000. So effectively, Desilu and AMT split the cost of the shuttle sets. Now, however, the reason that most people have a tendency to think that they did the Shuttlecraft sets for free, including Gene in the previous video, is that AMT never started selling the shuttle models until 1974. So up to that point, AMT had never made a dime on the shuttle. And by the time they did get their $12,000 back over 8 years later, the only people who were even aware of the transactions were the accountants. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how urban legends are born. Now, a shuttle had been suggested 2 different times in Season 1, but was ultimately rejected each time due to cost. So when AMT began negotiations to license the Enterprise, the Star Trek folks decided to bring up the subject of the need for a shuttlecraft set. Matt Jeffries drew up a concept of what the shuttle should look like. You can see it here on the screen. And the design was sent to AMT, who then in turn reached out to Steve Winfield with the proposal. Looking over it, Steve immediately realizes they have a problem. One, Desilu wanted the sets completed within 30 days, and there is no way that the beautifully gracious and curved craft that we're looking at here could actually have been done in 30 days. But looking over the other paperwork that had been sent along with that design, Steve noticed there was a design for something called a utility craft, and that design could be used. So he sends back word to Matt Jeffries. Matt Jeffries says, yeah, go with it. And then Steve immediately goes out and reaches out to a man by the name of Thomas Kellogg, who was most noted for his work on the Studebaker Avanti. Thomas Kellogg then designs what we call in fandom today the Kellogg Shuttlecraft, and you see a 3D rendering of it right here. He sends that information back to Steve. Steve then changes it into what we see today as the Galileo. Now, what you see here is a series of photos that were taken at the shop where Jean assembled the Galileo. She was designed to break into 3 pieces: the main cabin and the two nacelle. Her inner structural skeleton had been made of steel. The outside was made out of masonite covered with fiberglass. Lastly, sheet metal was used from about midships up to the very top where the inner curve had to be done. And here's a fun fact for you. The rear landing strut was an honest-to-God, real-life surplus airplane landing strut. Now, it is widely accepted today, because we have photographic proof, by the way, that the AMT models were built offset and then shipped to Desilu. But that was not always the case. For the first few decades after the 1970s, a lot of key people in Star Trek fandom said that that was impossible. The union rules never would have allowed that to happen offset. But what they did to get around the union rules was pretty ingenious. Steve built the shuttlecraft. Then he shipped it in pieces to Desilu, where the local union labor force completed the assembly, did the painting and the fine detail work. This is an extremely unusual step for Desilu to take. This is the reason why so many people believed that the Galileo was built completely on set. Now, additionally, for maybe $600, $650, a 24-inch studio model was to be supplied by AMT for filming in miniature. It was originally delivered with just the number 173 on it. I have no idea what the 173 meant. You can see it in the 2 photos above as they took some test shots against a blue screen before they would send it off to Richard Dayton, where he would apply the now famous numbers, letters, pinstriping, and of course, the name Galileo. So next we have a few shots showing a more close-up view of the model while doing those same camera tests. And then lastly, we have a high-resolution black and white photo that was discovered in the Roddenberry papers by Doug Drexler, I believe, which shows us our best detailed look yet of the model before it had been sent off to Richard Dayton to be finished. Most unexpectedly was the fact that the top of the model had etched lines in it, which no one remembered being there. So now we'll take a look at a few set shots of the shuttle after Dayton finished his exterior work. And this photo is just awesome. There's no other way to describe it. What you see here is a photo of a very young gentleman named Ed Baracella. And Ed, if I pronounce your name wrong, I am really, really sorry. But a very lucky young man Ed was. His father was an engineer at Film Effects of Hollywood, which just so happened to be one of the studios where the models were filmed for the TV series. As far as I've ever been able to tell, this is the only production set photo that had ever been taken of both the 11-foot Enterprise and the 24-inch shuttlecraft in the same photo. Now, one interesting thing to note on the miniature as it appeared in the series. By accident, the side decals that Dayton used on the model were missing the dash between NCC and 1701, as you can clearly see here in the photo of young Ed, as well as these 2 other photos taken here from the series. The model vanished sometime after the series ended, and they had assumed for many years that it was lost, stolen, or maybe even destroyed during a massive purge of old props that Paramount did in 1973. However, in 1987, the Galileo model unexpectedly appeared. Mike Akuda, a long-time scenic art supervisor on various Star Trek projects over the years, told a story where set decorator John Dwyer found the shuttlecraft miniature in storage at Paramount. He grabs the miniature, he comes up to the art department, shows it to Mike and says, "Do you know what this is?" Now, this should tell you how bad the condition of the model was, because John Dwyer worked on the original series as a set decorator with Matt Jeffries, and probably had even seen this model before, although granted, it had been 20 years earlier. Mike, however, knew instantly what they had found. The entire front bulkhead, that's the front panel that has the 3 windows in the front, was gone. The overall surface was in really bad condition, cracked and warped. The nacelles themselves had literally been snapped off, and the corrugated cowlings on the end of each of the nacelles were missing. So they sent it down to the effects shop to have it refurbished. But amazingly, when it came back to them, the effects shop had made a mistake. They put a one-piece plexiglass front bulkhead across the entire bow instead of 3 ports in a bulkhead like it was supposed to be. How could you work for Star Trek in the art department and not know what the front of the Galileo looked like? Amazing. Now, in a very fitting gesture, though, Dwyer worked magic, and he actually used it as set dressing in Riker's quarters in the very first season of Star Trek The Next Generation. Although, as you can see here, he did have to point the shuttlecraft away from us to hide the fact that the bulkhead was plexiglass and was wrong. One thing the refurbishment people did do properly is they corrected the omission of the dash by putting it back where it belonged in the registry decals on the side. Years later, the model was given on loan to the Smithsonian in 1992 to be exhibited as part of the Star Trek exhibition that was held at the Hayden Planetarium. The shuttlecraft model is still in storage at the Smithsonian today. Now, moving back to the full-size sets, I have one final observation. They weren't really full-size sets. The external set for the shuttlecraft Galileo was actually built at 3/4 scale. Now, this meant that the interior of the shuttlecraft was not even 6 feet tall. I think it was somewhere around maybe 5.5 feet, somewhere in that area. You can clearly see this in the publicity photo here showing Nimoy literally half in, half out the portal, and him having to stoop over very low just to be able to get his head out the door. Now, to compensate for that on the interior set, the ceiling was raised and even featured a large area in the center of the ceiling where lights and cameras and microphones could be positioned for the shot. Here is a rare photo print taken, I believe, from one of the Lincoln Enterprise 35mm slides that they used to sell, which clearly shows the upper removable roof, the lights, and the microphone hanging behind Leonard Nimoy's head in the ceiling. In this same shot, as it appeared in the TV series, we found out that they pulled out slightly and lowered the frame just enough to hide the open ceiling and mic, and at the same time just exposing the very top of the front bulkhead in front of the actors. Next, they actually used much lower chairs. Because of this, they tried to stay away from shots of people standing inside the shuttlecraft. This is sort of like the one we see here with Leonard Nimoy, who immediately tends to remind me of Gulliver's Travels. The actual footage of this quick scene that this is a snapshot from only ran for 1.3 seconds in order to try to trick the eyes into not noticing that the perspective was being off. By using the lower chairs, and then lowering the camera just enough to cut out the ceiling mic, the illusion that the shuttle is bigger inside is now complete. One last thing, as you can see in the photograph on the right-hand side, the interior set was constructed out of 4-foot wide sections that could be removed and replaced as needed. You can see the seams here. This allowed them to remove a section, stick a camera in it, and shoot from that vantage point, sort of like what they did in the bridge. Those seams are not really visible in the TV show, but you can clearly see them in photographs of the set. Now, here's another fun fact that you will not see anywhere else, and was told to me actually by my new friend, Dave Arland. The Galileo shuttlecraft was on wheels, which makes perfect sense when you consider that it was designed to be pushed around in a soundstage. But those wheels have never really been acknowledged by anyone. However, during the last restoration that was done by the Snyders, we have photographs, finally, of what those wheels look like. Now, when Star Trek was canceled in 1969, Paramount donated the shuttle to the Braille Institute in Los Angeles for young children to use as a plaything. Unfortunately, there were many sharp surfaces and edges that really made it unsafe for children, especially visually impaired children. The children kept bumping into sharp edges, so the Institute knew they couldn't keep this. In the meantime, Roger Heisman's son informed him that he wanted the Galileo 7 and the robot from Lost in Space. Dream high, little guy. The Heismans were actually quite well off, so dear old dad was in fact able to contact the two studios, and voila, actually was able to buy both props. They placed the Galileo proudly in their front yard. But keep in mind, this was an interior set for a soundstage. It was never ever designed to be kept outdoors. So gradually, it began to rot. This series of photos were taken on June 20th, 1975 by Michelle Evans, who had been introduced to Heisman to a mutual friend. Note the padlock on the doors to prevent people from actually prying them open to get inside. Now, remember that I mentioned that the Heismans were fairly well off? Well, they lived in one of the nicer subdivisions out near Los Angeles, and quite frankly, the neighbors did not appreciate the sight of a rotting shuttlecraft in the front yard that was visible to the whole neighborhood. So they do what all good neighbors do when they first have a dispute. They vandalized the model. Sometime in around May of 1975, one of them even threw a brick just through the left side of the model's door. You can see a significantly visible hole right here in this photo. Now, the last photo that I have from that day that Michelle took is a rare shot indeed of the model from the front and right-hand side. Before we go too much further, please notice the buckling of the wood towards the nacelle. This shot is rare because the model up to this point had only been shown on TV from the left side. All photographs were taken from the left side, the port side. Why were they only taken from the port side, you ask? Well, because that was the side that had the doors in it. So as the years would go by, the starboard side would be photographed many times. But by the time this photo was taken in 1975, it's the earliest known photo of the starboard side of the Galileo. Now, as the years went by, even though we did not have the internet for several decades after that, Star Trek conventions were their own form of social media amongst fans, and word got out where the Galileo was. And one by one, people would come out and they would have their photographs taken standing next to the Galileo. There are probably a couple hundred of these photographs around the country, but because they were taken in the early 70s, these photographs pretty much exist in family albums that are probably covered with dust at this point. So it's very rare to see one. I was only able to identify 4 from this time period. But before we get too much further into the story, it's important that we have to acknowledge a few other facts that also cause confusion with Star Trek fans to this very day. First off, there was at least one other full-sized shuttlecraft Galileo making the rounds at Star Trek conventions as early as 1976. The photos that you see here are of Space 1999 actor Nick Tate, who appeared at a 1976 August Party Star Trek convention at the University of Maryland in College Park. Notice the condition of the replica that he posed with, and also, as you can see from sitting in the chair, it had a functional interior, which the real one did not. Now, not too long ago, I was contacted by someone who may have actually ended up with this very same mock-up. And this is what makes the history of the Galileo even more obfuscated today. At the same time the real one was rotting away, this gentleman believed that he had a screen-used shuttlecraft Galileo prop. Still believed it to this day that that was used on screen, when we know that the internals were not built in the original shuttlecraft Galileo. So it couldn't have been a screen-used prop. But does it really matter? Does it matter at all that this young gentleman, when he was growing up, had a replica of a shuttlecraft rather than an actual one? No, it doesn't. I mean, heck, he had a shuttlecraft. I didn't have a shuttlecraft. You didn't have a shuttlecraft. He had a shuttlecraft, and his childhood memories are the most important things in the world. And the very fact that he remembers that fondly and it has such a strong bond for Star Trek transcends the physical nature. So it doesn't really matter. His memories and love for that particular shuttlecraft are still valid today, even if it wasn't a screen-used shuttlecraft. However, I did tell you I was going to give you some tricks on how to identify if a photograph was taken during what I call the Heisman era. So, whenever you're doing research like this, contemporary literature is your greatest friend. Contemporary journalism, even better. So I went out and I found a book published in 1988, it has not been published since, that contained a bunch of photographs in it, and obviously more richly detailed information than most of the time exists on the internet today. So using that book as a reference source, and you can see it here on the screen, it is The Ships of Star Trek by James Van Hise, we're able to build a profile of what the shuttle looked like when it was in Heisman's hands. Now, because of the photos in the book, we know a couple things. One, the rear roof had collapsed and the impulse deck grille was completely gone. Two, there are 2 distinct black gashes in the starboard right side of the shuttlecraft towards the front. 3, the buckled panel that was in Heisman's yard is now missing from the right side. 4, The nacelle cap front ends have completely rusted off. Now, we know from the earlier photograph that when it was in Heisman's yard, the middle window cover was missing. By the time it shows up in the storage lot, earliest pictures, 2 of the covers are missing, and at some point before it left the lot, the 3rd and final window cover was missing. The dead giveaway that you should always look for a Heisman-era picture are the 2 gashes on the right starboard side, because they didn't exist at any other time. Now, quite a few people photographed this while it was still in that lot. They didn't necessarily know who owned it, but they photographed it. And when we see the crushed roof that we're used to, we know that they photographed it in the Rebel mini storage facility in Los Angeles. And because we have photographs showing the crushed roof and the vehicles beside the Galileo, the bus and stuff like that, we know that any other photographs showing the Galileo with those vehicles beside it were taken here as well. So after paying for storage for several years for a model he knew he was never going to use and never going to fix, it was literally just rotting away, Roger Heisman decided it was time to sell the model. So he reached out to various fanzines and commercial magazines such as Starlog. His asking price at the time was about $1,500. He would later say that a lot of people would ask to see it or ask to see photographs, but were immediately disinterested once they found out the condition that the shuttlecraft was in. Now, to be honest, there were a few very serious buyers that did contact him, but they later reported that they found Roger to be very difficult to deal with and they couldn't come to terms. My guess is this type of back and forth banter was they wanted to come down in the price. However, in 1985, there was a chance encounter in which Roger mentioned in passing that he had the original Galileo and wanted to sell it. The other party that he spoke with contacted their brother, a man by the name of Steve Haskins, and a deal to buy the Galileo as is for $1,800 was quickly made. Haskins moved the mock-up to another open storage area, this time near San Diego. He then spent another $8,500 on its restoration and had the preliminary results displayed at the June 1986 Creation Entertainment's 20th anniversary Star Trek convention in Anaheim, California. Just before it appeared at this convention, it actually made its very first post-series public appearance at the Kobe swap meet that was held in the sports arena parking lot. Now, on its way to the convention, the rear left nacelle cowl was damaged and had been removed during transport to Anaheim. Haskins repeatedly requested donations and circulated a petition to have the California Museum of Science and Industry inter it as a display. But of course, the petition would do no good. The museum had already made up their mind and turned the model down, saying they just didn't have the room and they weren't interested in, quote, television fiction, unquote. Ouch. At the convention, Haskins met Carlos Rivera, who volunteered to help out Haskins with the restoration and who subsequently did the bulk of the restoration, moving the shuttle in November to yet another open storage area, this time in Thousand Palms. However, once again, the cost was too high, so they moved it again to a different open storage area in La Jolla. As would be the case for decades to come, the only shelter it would ever receive is an occasional tarp. Now, interestingly enough, Haskins had been approached by Paramount Pictures, who had expressed an interest in using the shuttle in Star Trek IV. Regretfully, Haskins had to turn down the opportunity because the mock-up was in no shape to be able to be used as a filming prop, and Haskins wanted to have the restoration completed himself, so therefore he wasn't able to do it on their time frame. Now, while the Galileo would not be ready for Paramount to use it as a filming prop, Rivera was able to get it put on display in the parking lot of a local movie theater for a week when Star Trek IV came out. To the best of my knowledge, no known photos of this exist at this point. If somebody out there has one, send me a line. Now, let's face it, the weather damage in California can be severe. In the summertime, it can get to be as high as 125, and in the winter, it can hit 35. Those type of temperature swings were severe enough to cause the model to begin deteriorating almost immediately again. Now, during this time, Haskins would go off to law school, and he arranged for Carlos to be responsible for the Galileo while he was away. As years went on, the restoration never really took place. And when Haskins graduated law school, he instructed Carlos just to sell the model. In 1989, it was eventually sold again, this time to an Ohio-based fan, Lynn Miller, who paid a reported $3,000 for it. Now, after it was sold, it would take about 2 years before Lynn would be able to go to California and take it back home to Canton. Fortunately, when she picked it up in April of 1991, we have more than some static screenshots to show you, as she had been working with a local fan club at the beginning of her story, and they recorded some video on the day that she arrived to pick up the Galileo. Her plan was to restore the shuttle once again, ultimately to display it at the National Air and Space Museum alongside the shooting model of the Enterprise. Isn't it amazing that all these people were certain that museums wanted the models, but they never really discussed it with museums before the purchases? Now, some people view these various owners as being responsible for the long-term neglect due to poor planning, but let's look at what the reality of the situation really is. None of these people were professional prop restorers, and if a single one of them hadn't paid out of their own pocket for things like restorations and storage fees, the Galileo would not be here today. We owe each and every one of them a debt of gratitude, even if they were not completely successful in achieving their goals. Now, once they got it back into Ohio, it became very, very clear that a total restoration was going to be needed. It had been stored outside since its release from the studio many years earlier, and time, weather, and abuse had taken its toll on the mostly wooden prop. It was apparent that several previous restorations had been attempted in some areas, but they were all really cosmetic. Now, these photographs will show you just how much restoration work Lynn actually did do on this model. The port side panel, Masonite original, from just above the main door all the way back to the stern, and just above the wing nacelle was all left original. It was still in good shape. The stern itself was also in fairly good condition, with the exception of the impulse engine being gone, and along with the roof as well. So the wood framework was stripped and replaced from bow to stern. The metal frame was blasted and reprimed. The exterior panels were recut and mounted in marine-grade plywood, and new floorboards were installed in the interior of the deck. Now, to help raise money for the project, she displayed the shuttle 7 months later, in November of 1991, at Lagrange Con convention in Cleveland. Unfortunately, it was raining that day, so the Galileo had to be viewed under a tarp, as you can see here. No one knew at the time that this was going to be the very last appearance of the model for another 22 years. So not long after the convention, the relationship between Lynn and the convention people deteriorated, and their assistance in the restoration work pretty much stopped, and it left Lynn to have to carry it on all on her own. Now, there's some back and forth both by Lynn and by them as to who was at fault, but it doesn't really matter. So she moved the Galileo to an industrial site for open storage in Akron, Ohio. Now, later, the site owners would say that they never heard from her again, and when they tried to reach her via phone number, she would never answer the phone. During this time, people had discovered where it was from looking at like Google Earth imagery that you're seeing here. At least one fan found it by accident. They went to the site and suggested to the owners that maybe the shuttle needed to be quote-unquote rescued. But let's face it, there are too many issues and costs involved, not to mention the legalities of the situation. In 2008, the company went out of business and their property was cleared out. The shuttlecraft disappeared. It was not known if Lynn had come to take it, or if some other fan had rescued it, or if it was simply bulldozed into oblivion. Most simply believed it had been destroyed. So in 2009, internet fans whipped up a frenzy trying to find this shuttlecraft. Was it destroyed? Was it moved? What happened? Has anybody seen it? This milk carton is one of the most amazing and hilarious things I ever saw. I found it amongst the wreckage of an old website that doesn't exist anymore. And seeing the shuttlecraft on the side of a milk carton with the phrase, "Have you seen me?" really brings back a lot of childhood memories. Then miraculously, Lynn Miller came forward in 2011 with some startling news. I originally purchased this to save it, but who's going to save me? My mother always said I'd better build a bathroom in it, so I was going to end up living in it. Obviously, she disapproved, and as in many things looking back, she was right. This thing will either save me or destroy me. After 23 years, I am about to sell it one way or the other. Anyone who'd like to find it, look for it on eBay in the near future. If it doesn't sell for more than the minimum, then I guess it'll either continue to be stored, or maybe a partner will help me finish restoring it. I am hopeful that there's somebody out there who has an interest in owning and finishing the restoration. I've spent $100,000 over the years trying to restore and to store the thing. The photo of it in the scrapyard was actually where it was parked undergoing restoration from a guy who I contracted to do the work. I was told to get it out of here now. You have 1 day to do so. I had it hauled to another location where it is still in storage today. Now, interestingly enough, that implies that the owners of the site telling people they couldn't get up with her didn't really have that communications issue. They just chose not to let people know that they were still in contact with her. So after all the years of sinking money into it and not having any end in sight, she finally put the Galileo up for auction at the local auction house, Kiko Auctioneers, where it sold for $61,000 on June 28th, 2012. The above video actually shows the condition of the Galileo 20 years to the day apart. Now, Adam and his wife Leslie are fairly well-known Star Trek collectors who have been in possession of many quality props, such at one point the Enterprise E that Adam is shown here with. Having the resources to effectively manage the restoration to its total conclusion was something no other owners had ever had when they owned the Galileo. Additionally, the Galileo was taken to a Master Shipwright in New Jersey to have them perform the restoration. After all, who better to do a restoration than someone who is skilled at refinishing sailboats and small ships? Now, there have been tons of stories and photos and TV shows on this restoration, so I'm not going to communicate to you again what you probably already know. Most people even think this is the only restoration, which in all honesty is one of the reasons I did this video, was to show that other people had tried their best, but it was up to Adam and Leslie to bring it home for us. These photos represent the Galileo the day they picked her up. But if you thought the Galileo's penchant for drama was over, you were very wrong. Not long after they began the restoration, Hurricane Sandy made a beeline straight for the Jersey shore. While there was not much anyone could do, after all, it was a hurricane, they did decide to hoist her into the air as high as they could in the event that things flooded. Luckily, that turned out to be a very wise decision, as the area did flood, but the Galileo was held above the worst of the flooding. Now, before we move on, though, I really have to stop here and have a few respectful comments about the seriousness of Hurricane Sandy and the indomitable will to survive by the local residents. You see, when I was a little boy in August of 1969, my family and I had to wait out Tropical Storm Camille in a little trailer just outside of Wildwood, New Jersey. While I was nowhere near old enough to understand the danger we were in, I remember to this day vividly the look on my mother's face as she waited for the storm to pass. And for that, I have to show you just a little clip to let you know how serious Sandy was in New Jersey. After 9 months of restoration effort, the Galileo was donated to the Space Center Houston Visitor Center for NASA's Johnson Space Center on July 31st, 2013. Amazingly, though, not only would the Galileo be completely restored, probably in better condition than she ever was, but it would also serve one more time as a filming prop. The Star Trek fan series, Star Trek Continues, was able to obtain permission to film a sequence of their third episode, The Fairest of Them All, with the Galileo while it was still in the museum. Utilizing modern green screen technology, all previous filming of the model in the original series was done using matte paintings in the background. The Galileo was pressed into service one final time for Captain Kirk.
You won't get away with this, Spock. You're just one man.
In every revolution, there is one man with a vision.
Who told you that?
You did.
Over the next few years, she was given out on loan to the Intrepid Museum in New York, where she sat fittingly beside the Space Shuttle Enterprise. And that, as they say, is the rest of the story. If you've enjoyed this video, please be sure to like it so that other people can find it as well. and subscribe if you'd like to be notified of the next video in our series. Until next time, live long and prosper.